Dean Wallace is joining us. Let's see. He's in the waiting room.
You want the lights out?
Yeah, how about these front lights, please? Okay, welcome everybody to the next Houseplant Academy 2025. Our topic today is terrariums, growing an indoor world under glass, which I think is a very exciting topic. I can't wait to get into it. For those of you who may or may not have been part of these before, we do them in person here at Extension, and we also have them streaming virtually. So if you're at home watching on your computer and you maybe hear me talk to someone else here in the room, don't worry, I haven't gone off track. It's just I'm managing two different groups of people. If you have any questions and you're at home, just type them in the chat and then I can look at those at the end, or Lisa can let me know you have a question. If someone here in person has a question at the end, I will do my best to repeat what they have asked me so that you all at home can hear. This probably won't take the entire hour because I have left time at the end for those who are here in person to make and take their own terrarium. So anyway, I hope everyone enjoys this topic, and it's one of my favorite things to do. It's a great way to garden year-round, no matter the weather. If it's snowing or raining or anything's going on, you can always grow a terrarium. So this one on the cover page here, I got from the Oklahoma State University Extension Office page, and I just love how it's turned on its side. And I would like to encourage you all to think creatively when you're making a terrarium. This should be the sort of thing that kind of has a bit of a whimsical, in my opinion, a whimsical, magical flair to it. You want to look in and see a tiny little world that kind of takes you away and helps you appreciate plants again. Okay, now why are we not scrolling? There we go. Okay. So what is a terrarium? A terrarium is a closed, transparent glass or plastic container that creates a mini environment or ecosystem for plants. How does it work? So the water from the soil is taken up into the plant as it grows, and it's released via transpiration. That water condenses on the glass and returns to the soil where it can be used again. So it's its own little water cycle, its own little ecosystem in there. How long does it last? People ask me this a lot because I'm sure you've heard of terrariums that have been going for years and years and years, and you might think, is mine going to last forever or for 10 years? Typically, they can go a long time without watering because of the mini water cycle, but most typical planted terrariums last 1 to 2 years. That's because often the plants outgrow their space, or you may have a fungus or disease that gets in there because of too much water. They might be neglected, or just a variety of different reasons. Now, that said, they can last ostensibly forever, but typically it's 1 to 2 years. The history of terrariums, you know, we have to talk about that because this is Extension and we have an educational slant on every topic we do. So you may have heard of the Wardian case. The terrarium as we know it was invented by Nathaniel Ward in the 19th century. And what I think was really interesting about him was he was a doctor in London, but he was also really into plants. He was a naturalist, a plant enthusiast as a hobby, and wanted to grow ferns in his yard, but he had very terrible success because of the London pollution of the time. It was right during the Industrial Revolution, and there was tons of smog and just horrible air quality, horrible everything, and it was just terrible conditions for growing a fern or any plants really. So being a naturalist, he liked to see moths and different insects evolved, and he would bury a chrysalis of a moth inside of some soil in a jar and put it aside and look at it later. And in one of these experiments, he noticed that a fern was actually emerging in this with some moss when he was just trying to look at the moth coming out of its chrysalis. He was amazed because here he had been trying for so long to grow a fern in his yard, and now all of a sudden he didn't even plant a fern, and one's popping up in this jar. Apparently some fern spores had been in that soil when he put it in, unbeknownst to him, and he was just completely taken with the idea. He kept that glass bottle closed for 4 years with no water added, so that's pretty remarkable. He went on to design glazed Wardian cases, which were used to ship plant specimens from overseas. And this is back when, you know, plant explorers would go on a journey by ship and they would be gone for a couple of years. You know, we want to go travel overseas, we get a plane ticket and we go. They would take off for a couple of years, go around and gather different plant samples and come back, and you wouldn't hear from them that whole time unless they sent a letter. And then half the time, about 80% of their plants died on the way back because there was just no good way to transport them. But this changed everything. Having them in this glass case really increased the success, and suddenly the game was on. Different botanical gardens popped up, and they were able to trade specimens, and it was just an exciting time to be discovering plants. So this is the oldest known planted terrarium. This is David Latimer, excuse me. He planted this in 1960 with only composted organic matter, some spiderwort seeds, and water. He opened it once in 1972 to water it again and then sealed it back, and he's just left it alone. And some people will say, well, how come his lasted for all those years and mine, after a couple of years was outgrowing or getting ratty? It was really just a perfect setup. He had everything going for him. So he had the sealed environment, the right amount of water and light. Wherever he put that in his house was just the right amount of light for what he needed to grow. And this spider wort, it started as a seed, and it's really very adaptable and happy in that kind of closed, humid environment. But it's very cool. It's going to outlive him, he always says. So how do you make a terrarium? So there are lots of different things to consider. You want to choose your vessel. And so I say the sky is the limit when it comes to making a terrarium. Before you try to go buy something, look around and see what you can find. It's so charming when you can go into a thrift store or a flea market or just downstairs on your shelves of your old pieces of glass and find something cool that you can turn into a terrarium. Really, anything can be repurposed like that. And then lastly, you can look online and in stores to find some nice glass dishes. I really like this. This is called a Wardian case after Nathaniel Ward. Very fancy. There's a company called H. Potter that makes these that are just really gorgeous, beautiful, fancy, expensive, read expensive investments. I'd love to have one day, but for most of us, these ones that you can get at like Target or Walmart or the flea market are a little more within our reach. So you'll need some tools to build your terrarium, and you really don't have to have a lot of fancy tools, but I'm going to tell you some of the things that I find that are very helpful. A small paintbrush, why would you want that? Because you might get dirt and grime stuck on the leaves or on the sides. It's very nice just to have an old paintbrush where you can stick it in there and wipe that away. You'll want a small spray bottle for watering. I like to use an old fork and spoon when I'm reaching in there. My big old clumsy hands are just, not really the best for digging around in this perfect little environment I'm trying to make, and it's smaller. So it's not like digging out in your garden. You want to have, if you want something just to lift up a little bit or scoop a little bit, old forks and spoons are great. Long tweezers are very nice. I use pencils and chopsticks as little daubers whenever I want to make a little space in the soil to plant something. And also, sometimes you might just want to move things around without getting your whole hand stuck in there and messing everything up. Highly suggest either buying or making a funnel to put things in, because when you go to dump your soil or your charcoal or whatever, lots of dust can fly up and make a mess. And then so you've got that to clean up, and that just kind of slows you down or it streaks your glass, and it's just an unnecessary issue. You put a funnel in there and pour it through, and everything goes right where it needs to go. And of course, scissors. So ideal lighting and temperature. You want your terrarium to be within several feet of a bright window, but not in direct sun. East and west facing windows are typically best. A dish garden that contains plants that need to receive bright light can be placed in direct sun, but that's the exception. So you may see those dish gardens that are just those open dishes with sand and some succulents or cacti. That's different than what we're doing here. A terrarium in low light conditions may benefit from a fluorescent light or a 100-watt bulb placed close to the terrarium for about 16 to 18 hours per day. And it likes typical home temperatures. It doesn't want extreme cold or extreme heat. So there are so many different plants you can put in a terrarium, but it's important to realize to make sure you're matching the type of vessel that you have with the type of plant you want to do. So plants for a closed terrarium, as you can see, there are so many: begonia, croton, dracaena, falsaralia, fern, petunia, and on and on. I won't read the whole list, but you get the idea. Plants for an open terrarium really would be African violet, air plants, cacti, succulents. These are plants that don't want to be wet. They might like growing in that little environment, but they don't want their leaves or their outer flesh wet all the time. And just think about the plant when you water it. You don't want to stick your succulent or cacti in water. You don't want to water the leaves of your African violet when you water it. So it all kind of just makes sense. Carnivorous plants are very fun to plant in terrariums and can be very exciting, but you need to keep in mind that they have different requirements than other plants do. Not just the fact that they will eat insects or eat different things. Some of those plants, some of the most popular ones, require a period of dormancy. So if you go to plant a pitcher plant or a Venus flytrap, just know they need a couple months of cold, of just being dormant. You might think your plant's dying, or it might just not last as long as you want. I've read about people who, during that dormancy period, they actually scoop them out. They put them in some wet sphagnum in a Ziploc bag, put them in the fridge for 2 months, take them back out. Now, these are very dedicated people. Not everybody wants to do that. But if you're really a hobbyist and want to try that, you can. But just know, don't set yourself up for failure by planting something in a terrarium that's going to have to go dormant for 2 months, and then you're wondering why is it like just a bunch of dead stuff, and then it doesn't come back because it didn't go through its cold period. So just like with anything in your yard, plant choices for terrariums can also depend on your individual home temperatures and lighting and humidity. So take all those into consideration when you're making your choices. Sourcing tiny plants is fun. You don't always have to buy little tiny plants. So as you can see, I put on here, you can go to Amazon and buy an assortment of little tiny plants for a reasonable price. Hirts.com, Hirts, has this little terrarium planter starter kit, which is a really reasonable price too. But you can also go to your local nursery. You can do propagations. So you don't have to buy something. You can just take propagations from something you already have or a friend has. Big box stores have these too, or you might just have a really big plant and you want to break it up into little pieces. There's no reason to have to go out and spend $5 on a little 1 or 2 inch plant if you don't want to. And then soil media for terrariums. So it's important to, just like you're planting outdoors, to match the type of soil that you're using with whatever plant you're planting. Indoor potting soil, like we always say, never use regular garden soil because it holds too much water and it can harbor pathogens that you don't want to introduce into your little terrarium, which doesn't have natural predators and different things to compete. Cacti succulent mix for when you're growing those terrariums with cacti and succulents. And then definitely, if you choose to try a carnivorous plant, use a carnivorous plant mix. Don't try to plant those in regular potting soil. It won't work. And I had somebody recently tell me they had a plant that wasn't doing well, and they couldn't figure out why. They were watering it correctly. They were doing all this. The lighting was great. Come to find out, that person used just regular garden soil. They did not use houseplant soil. And a little thing like that makes all the difference. So how do you build this terrarium once you have it? It's good to design it because they're typically viewed from one side, and it's a good practice to slope that potting soil for viewing on that side. So a lot of times I've taken terrarium classes and I've read about them, and they will often tell you to kind of slope it. Don't just make a flat surface. Good to keep in mind. It's fun to put colorful things and variegated things, but you also don't want it to be a mishmash circus of just all this color and everything competing. You want something maybe serene green in there to kind of rest the eye, or some natural elements like wood and rocks and sand. Decorative elements are wonderful for like the fairy garden figures. If you're not into fairy gardens, you don't have to plant little fairies and little, gnomes. There are all kinds of little tiny figures you can put in there that have, like if you're making it for, say you're making one for a boy, and they don't want a fairy garden or they don't want this or that, you can put a little matchbox car in there and make it be, whatever you want. I've also read that people will use those little figures they use for making, like building train sets, like the model train. It's called like HO scale, I think is what they call it. I'm not that familiar with it. People will use those little things to put like little train sets in there, little people. So sky's the limit. Container prep, always thoroughly clean and disinfect the container before you plant it. Make sure it's completely dry before you start. And then some people like to use like Windex or glass cleaner, but if you do that, you have to let it air out for several days because you don't want any of those chemical smells or odors to just stay in that little terrarium. It's going to mess with your plants and just throw a fork in the road. So charcoal, always put charcoal at the bottom. It's antimicrobial. It'll control odors. It'll prevent that root rot setting in. Sphagnum moss is really nice for putting between your soil and your charcoal, but it's not absolutely necessary. Some people like to make that layer. And something we always tell people about as far as putting rocks in. It's just like when we tell them to not put a rock layer at the bottom of their pot. And you'll still go online and see, excuse me, you'll still go online and see some sources will tell you put the rock layer for drainage. And we all know, hopefully by now, that creates the perched water table. It actually holds more water there and encourages more root rot and encourages more fungus gnats because of the standing water. So you really don't want to do that. If you want to have the look of the rock, though, you can do what they call a faux rock layer. So say you're layering your charcoal in your soil, and you can just put the rocks around the rim of it, so it looks like you have rocks going all because you may like that look of the different layers, but you don't want to make that so-called drainage layer of rocks. It's just not a good thing. Some terrariums, of course, survive that way. Some tomatoes grow in the shade. I don't know what to tell you, but in general, don't do that. So placing your plants, and after you add the soil, I always say slightly moist. You don't want the dust kicking up. It's good to put it through a funnel if you can. You don't want it to be so wet and muddy that it's sticking to the glass or that it's just like a clumps in your hands. Using a chopstick or pencil to make that divot in the growing medium is very nice because you can kind of design and set where you want your plants to be. Make sure that you're using plants that are disease-free and they're healthy. Again, not too many variegated plants together because you don't want it to be like a circus in there. And consider the type of plant and the vessel you're planting in. Right plant, right place applies to your terrariums too. And also, if it's something that's going to get tall, keep in mind you're going to have to trim that because I've had different terrariums I've planted that have had pilea and they're just going so well and they're getting tall and they're looking so cute. I just don't want to mess with it. But then they start to get leggy and kind of ringing around the top. And before I know it, it's a mess and I have to cut it. So just keep in mind if you don't trim your plants back, eventually you're going to have a bit of a problem, but you might just want to enjoy it for a while it lasts. Always groom your plants before you plant them. So just like when you're planting in your yard, trim anything yellowing or decayed before you plant in there because anything yellowing or decayed is more likely to harbor disease or to rot. And then stand back and look at it from different angles and make changes if necessary. It's always good to do that when you're in the middle of it than when you're at the end because it stinks when you're done and you're looking, you're like, oh, that's not right. You have to put your big old hand in there again with your tweezers or whatever and try to rearrange. So more tips. When you're placing plants in deep containers, like look at this one here, it's very deep. And so you can imagine, trying to set everything just so in there. Long tongs or tweezers are great. Even if they're your cooking tongs, they're a lot better sometimes than sticking your whole arm and your hand in there and trying to work it around. Sometimes people will wrap the plant in some paper and stick it in there and then just yank the paper out. It sounds like a lot of extra hassle, but it really is kind of easy. Once you unwrap it, you remove it, and it's much easier transition. And then you want to mist the plants to wash off the soil and give the plants a head start. Observe it closely for a while for signs of diseases or decay because you do want to stay on top of all of that. Now, some terrarium aftercare. As I said, pruning, because the plants could get too tall and they could touch the sides of the terrarium, which looks really cool, but it does make them a little more likely to, more prone to decay if they stay wet. Just keep your eye on it. Plants in terrariums aren't meant to grow at a rapid rate, so fertilization is seldom necessary. Just know that. After a year, your plants start to look yellow or lack vigor. You can apply some water-soluble houseplant fertilizer at a quarter strength. So this one here is so cute. It's got some little Salaginella in the back, some Fittonia, and they've put like some little white balls and disco balls just to kind of pick up the color, I guess, the white and the green. So just keep your options open and always be thinking when you're looking at things of things to put in your terrarium to make it a little personal for you. Some more aftercare. Avoid moving your terrarium once you find the right spot for it because frequent changes to light intensity and duration of light could be harmful to your plants. If the water droplets form on those inside walls or on the lid, open the lid for about an hour and let that moisture evaporate for a bit. Again, remove dead or decaying material as soon as it is spotted to prevent mold and fungus from growing inside your terrarium. And then natural elements like acorns and pine cones are really cute. I love to use them, but just want to let you know they will grow mold. I found out the hard way. So something you can do to prevent that is coat them with polyurethane. It does prevent, it's an extra step, but I think it's worth it. I'd rather use those natural elements and just coat them in polyurethane than buy a plastic acorn because it's just not the same for me, but you can do what you want to do. Mold inside a terrarium is often a sign of an imbalance in the terrarium's ecosystem. So too much water, poor air ventilation, and decaying plant matter can all contribute to that problem. Just leave the lid open or slightly ajar if the air circulation is a problem, and wipe down that glass to remove any mold or algae buildup. Just stay on top of it, and grooming and being neat and sanitation will go a long way when it comes to making your terrariums. So if you do encounter mold in your terrarium, don't freak out. It's pretty normal. Remove any affected plants or substrate. You can also use diluted hydrogen peroxide or vinegar to wipe surfaces, even of the plants. You don't want to put the straight vinegar or the straight peroxide on there. No, 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 bad idea. If you want to dilute it a little bit on a Q-tip or on a cotton ball and just sort of wipe through there, that's helpful. Rubbing alcohol can be used. Some people will spray chamomile tea because it's a mild organic fungicide. Now, you don't want to spray a whole cup of tea in there, just a little bit. Keep in mind it's a closed environment. And then it's best to use distilled water to water your terrarium, to disturb the natural balance with the chemicals or toxins in your tap water. That's not to say that if you do use tap water, it's going to cause a problem. It may not. It probably won't. Who knows? But if you can and want to avoid introducing those types of issues, just use some distilled water, or fill up your water jug and leave it out for 24 hours, let some things evaporate, and then pour it in to water your terrarium. So something that I really was not that aware of previously until I started digging into the world of terrariums is a bioactive terrarium. And of course, there are so many different types of terrariums, but I bring this one up because some people like to put these little springtails in their terrariums to clean up the terrarium. They look kind of gross just in this picture, and I kind of think, well, gosh, what if they get out? But if it's sealed and they're so small, you're not really going to see. So they can be a cleanup crew for the terrarium. They will go through and eat any decaying matter. They can eat the mold. When you first start your terrarium and you want to put some springtails in, they're not going to have anything to feed on. So some people will put some leaf litter in there to start them off, to give them some food. But as it goes, they will take care of any cleanup for you, just like introducing your own little natural environment. And something interesting about them, they can also increase the amount of moss in your terrarium, which I did not realize, but moss will reproduce asexually, but the other way they can reproduce is by the springtails being attracted to the pheromones from the female moss, and that aids in the transfer of the male moss sperm to the female sex organs of the moss. So who knew that moss could be male and female, and it could do all that? I did not before this. So there's a whole wide world out there of plant things we didn't know about, or at least me anyway. Okay, so this is one of my favorite, well, this really probably is my favorite part of the whole terrarium world, is just introducing fun elements into your terrarium. This is how to kind of make it part of your daily life. I like to add terrarium decor like fairy garden figures, reindeer moss, rocks, etc. And I put on here some stores like Hobby Lobby, Michael's, Dollar Tree, Pike, that have different terrarium decor. And of course, those aren't the only places that would have it. Online and just wherever sells plants may have some they could use, but also just things you have around your home that you might want to put in there. Now, obviously, it has to be something water safe that's not going to, deteriorate, or you could take something and coat it in polyurethane to keep it water safe, but really anything that can kind of give it personality. And I hope you don't mind some personal pictures, because that's where we're going with this. So this was my Christmas holiday terrarium, one of them that I make. And so I had put some polyurethane on that acorn there, and I'm going to say that's some sort of nut I have back there, but I can't really tell. But that's a lot of pilea. And then I have these little Christmas colored mushrooms. And then when Christmas is over, I just take the mushrooms out and put something else in. So that makes it fun. And people always comment on it when they come to the house, or my kids enjoy it. So I like it. You can commemorate a special vacation. And as you can see, the table, this is my old house in Missouri. It was covered in things from vacation. And I didn't know when I took the picture it was going to be in a presentation for other people to see. I just took the picture for myself. But I put some shells from a beach vacation in there, and that was really nice for us to enjoy. It was just, you can kind of give it your own personal flair that way. I love decorating for fall and Halloween, so I have the little witch's hat with a spider in there and some other little fall things from the yard. Again, you can coat them in polyurethane, or you could just let them stay in there until they mold and take them out. I mean, it doesn't have to be a perfect system. You don't have to mess with that if you don't want to. I like to swap out Halloween for fall. So the tiny little pumpkin in there just about did me in. It was so cute. I loved it. I can't get enough of it. And then this was just a bowl of mosses. And I have a little tiny shepherd's hook there that says delight in the little things. And that was just really fun. I really loved having that bowl out on the counter for a while. This was my Thanksgiving themed terrarium. So I have a little Thanksgiving angel, but of course she's holding a cornucopia. But you could do your own spin on that. And then this is not really your typical planted terrarium, but I put it in because I just wanted to show the different types of things you can do. So I have some container water gardens in my yard, and I have water lettuce every time and water hyacinth. And I like to bring some of those water lettuce in because they reproduce like crazy. If you've ever grown water lettuce, they will make babies like just practically out over the side of any container water garden you have. So I cut them off, I put them in this big empty terrarium with some water, and I had some little floating fairy lights. I think I got those on Amazon, like in a big box. They're activated when you put them in the water, and that was really cool. Really cost nothing, and it was just a fun way to use some extra plants I had popping out of my water garden. And this I call vintage charm because I like to say I got roped into or sucked into buying this whole set of Libby pumpkin glass terrariums from the 70s because I saw it on an Instagram post by this plant lady that I really liked. And she was really into terrariums and she had them. And so I, of course, had to have them. And now I have this whole set of varying sizes of mushrooms. I'm like, why did I bid on this? Why did I buy this? But anyway, so I did that. And I planted it with some red begonias and just tried to incorporate the red and the green with some rocks. And it was fun to have while I had it. Let's see here. And here are my sources. Now, so this is basically my presentation on terrariums. I find when teaching about terrariums, the best way to do it is you hear the information about the education, but then you kind of have to go hands-on. So the people who are here with me in person are going to make some hands-on terrariums. At this time, though, I will take any questions you have, whether in person or online, about terrariums and try to help you out with that. Do you have any questions in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, let me see. I can probably read
I
it.
need to know more about water lettuce. Where'd you get it?
Okay, so water lettuce, I typically buy mine at either Pike or Petal and Pond, and Petal and Pond here in Lawrenceville is formerly Randy's. So you don't have to buy it at Pike or Petal and Pond. I say that because any place that will sell water plants during the summertime has it. And so Pike usually has a section of their nursery where they sell water plants for water gardens, and then of course Petal and Pond has a whole area for that. And it's very inexpensive and it's very cute, and yeah, there you go.
All right. Let's just knock the ones out online first.
Okay.
Someone would like to know more about orchid terrariums, like what orchids would be best, what combinations, that kind of thing.
So as far as orchid terrariums, orchids, I always like to recommend trying to get the little teeny tiny ones, the micro ones, because most of these of the larger ones are going to be too large for any vessel that you have to do. And if you invest in one of those really pretty standing Wardian cases, or even if you find one at an estate sale or an antique market, they're pretty big and they're not like the kind of portable little thing you can get with a jar or whatever. So try to use the little micro Phalaenopsis moth orchids. I see those at Kroger even, like just a really tiny thing, and they will take a long time to get bigger and they won't outgrow that space for a very long time. So that's what I would really recommend.
Okay. Any social media groups on terrariums you would recommend?
I mean, just go to Instagram and type in terrariums and you'll find whatever your heart's desire. Or Facebook, yeah, or Facebook, whatever. As far as accessing the recording, I see a lot of questions about this. So we do record these presentations, and once they're edited, they do go up on our Metro Master Gardener channel. And so you don't have to be a master gardener to access it. You can just go onto YouTube, go to Metro Master Gardener channel, and you'll see all of my recordings and also all of Lisa Klein's recordings. She does usually 2 a month on different educational plant topics. So you can find it all there. Clean rainwater. Yeah, I think clean rainwater would be fine. A way to incorporate food growing them. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I've never personally seen it or tried it, but maybe so. Yes, Metro Master Gardener YouTube or Facebook.
How do you harvest water lettuce and how long does it take to grow?
Harvesting really is just a matter of pulling it up, cutting it off from cutting the babies off for the rest of it and planting it wherever. So as far as harvesting it, it's not something that you eat. It's something that your plants, or excuse me, the fish will eat. So I put goldfish in my water gardens, and they like to nibble on the roots. I think there probably are types of spinaches and lettuces that are grown in water that are edible, but this is not this. This is just a decorative thing. It's just for looks and for the fish.
Uh, What about growing microgreens in a terrarium setting?
I don't know about the humidity for that. I think that it would be too humid. Um, yeah, I have never seen that, and I think it would probably be too humid of an environment. The microgreens need um, good airflow and air circulation so they don't get fungus and different types of rot or mold growing on them. So I would advise against it.
Um, I don't have any others.
Okay. Do we have any in-person questions?
You talking about charcoal, are you talking about briquettes, or are you talking about ground up powder? Or...
Okay, so we have a question about the charcoal to use, if you could use charcoal briquettes, and I would say no, it does need to be horticultural charcoal. And maybe if it's possible, Lisa, I don't know if it's too much of a hassle, we could kind of pan around on some of the things I have at the table. But here I have a table with some different terrarium plants. I have some different terrarium vessels. We have horticultural charcoal, which they sell this at Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot, all your plant nurseries. Very inexpensive, and you only need a little bit, but definitely make sure you use horticultural charcoal. Yes.
I had a question. If I forage like moss a lot,
Mhm.
is there a way to make sure that does it need like a sterile time to leave it out before I put it in the terrarium?
You know, I've read conflicting things about different types of mosses. It really depends. Some people will tell you that aquarium type mosses are better to use than introducing ones from outdoors because outdoors can contain, different things, or they might just not be suited to that environment. Because believe it or not, the variety of mosses, they all have different little ins and outs of those. So I would say you could try. It's not going to be like a guaranteed thing. If you want to sterilize it, I don't really know. I mean, are you saying like to prevent bugs coming in, or are you thinking about disease?
I'm thinking mostly about disease.
Disease. I mean, really, that's advice for most plants. People will tell, and not many people follow this advice, but what experts usually tell you to do is that whenever you bring any new plant home, to quarantine it from all the rest of your plants. And I can tell you, I almost never do this. And I know, slap me on the hand, I should do it, but if you bring something in that's got like a white, spider mites or something, you're going to infect the whole rest of your house plants. So I know that from a common sense point of view, same type of thing. With this being a little terrarium, the stakes aren't that high. It's not going to like decimate, a lot of money you've spent or a lot of, something very serious. So I would just say experiment with it. Do we have any other in-person questions about terrariums? Okay. And so are we spotlighted, Lisa? Okay. So we're going to talk about, it says, do you not have to feed carnivorous plants insects? Well, actually, no. It's kind of, they're nuanced. You can buy food online for them. They don't necessarily have to have insects. That's kind of more of a different class. I'm planning on hopefully having a carnivorous plant class in the future, and I can go more into that right now. I probably couldn't give you just a simple answer. So let's go ahead and take a look at this table. I've got a whole bunch of mason jars, which Lisa's highlighting right now. And these are just for the people here who did not bring their own vessel to use. You can use something really large though too, a large like demijohn they're called, kind of what you saw the David Latimer with the world's largest or world's oldest, terrarium. And then I've got some indoor potting mix, a variety of some indoor plants I got. These are from, let's see, Lowe's, Walmart, Pike, just little mosses, Betonia, polka dot plant, and pilea. They're great. And then Lisa, if you could zoom in over on the oh, that's a cute little moss. I think it's the Irish moss. It's supposed to do well. And what I'll do with these, it's not like you necessarily buy one of those and that's one terrarium. You can take those plants and divide them into a few different. That's what we're going to do here. You can take like one thing of moss and break it up. So I've got all kinds of decorative moss, and those are from my own personal collection. That's why they're in Ziploc bags. I've got like a dark purple, I've got light green, chartreuse. We've got indoor potting mix, so make sure it's indoor potting mix. Please don't use the raised garden bed mix or your garden soil or topsoil because it's just not going to be good. And then Lisa, please show them the little coffee pot. So this tiny little coffee pot, which is so cute, I got it at a thrift store. I had no idea what I was going to do with it, but I just knew I had to do something. And it's got little holes in the top, so I'm going to make that into a little terrarium. It just to kind of show you guys that you can really use anything as long as you're creative. You don't have to spend a lot of money. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can be very cute. I've got a jar of rocks there that I plan to use as a faux rock layer because remember, we're not going to put a whole layer of rocks at the bottom and make that perched water table. And I've also got some little tiny wood discs that I bought that were just for the purpose of making a little path in your terrarium. And so any sort of hobby store, I know some people like to slice their own and cut their own. It's okay. People have mixed reviews with that. So sometimes if you do that with your own wood in your own yard, it might decay in the terrarium or develop mold or something else. It might
Also do little pieces of slate or flagstone.
slate or flagstone, Lisa remarked.
Rock yard.
Yes. Right. So she's mentioning, and I read about that too, using little pieces of slate and flagstone. Those do great. The squirt bottles, the sprayers for watering. You don't want to just pour your watering can in there. If you could hold up that funnel too, I wanted to show people this is just a canning funnel, and I've seen different types. It's got a wider base. So it's not just like when you're pouring liquids into a funnel. It's got the wider bit so you can pour your charcoal and your soil through and get it into your container without it flying everywhere. If you just try to take that bag and pour it in there, God help you because it's going to make a mess. Or even a scoop, it can go just flying. This gives you some more control. And then I think I have, let's see, like a mushroom and a jar back there too, if they want to look at that. Oh, and we have somebody says they've used wood from their backyard before, but they made sure to bake it first. Yes. So bake it or cure it or whatever you can do to make sure it's safe. Let's see. Is everybody able to see these things that Lisa's holding up? So these are some chopsticks I use as a little dot. Let's see. You guys can see? Okay, good. All right, let's see. What else do we have on here? Would you think a little composting worm might be? I don't know about a composting worm. I don't know enough about that to really comment intelligently. So yes, scissors, you got to have your scissors. And then over here, I don't know if you want to walk over there, Lisa, or how convenient that is. I bought a whole bunch of these little gnomes and fairy garden things. And if gnomes aren't your thing, that's fine. You don't have to use a gnome. Hopefully, I've shown that in my presentation. And little fairy gardens, if that's not your thing, you don't have to use that either. It's just an option. These can be very inexpensive. I got little 2 packs of these for $1.25 each. So again, not expensive. I've got the coffee liners or coffee filters. We'll use that to separate the layers. That water will still go through, but it'll also keep things in more of a decorative layer instead of just seeping right to the bottom. Something I do with my houseplants too, I always put a coffee filter at the base or even a paper towel or a napkin if you want to do that, just to keep everything kind of neat and tidy and in line. So for orchids, do I buy different soil? Moss acceptable. So you want to definitely use orchid. Something to plant your orchids with would be sphagnum moss. If you're doing it in a terrarium, I would not do the typical chunky orchid bark that you buy. It's not going to really be the best for a terrarium. Taking some sphagnum moss, hydrating it, and then kind of squeezing the excess out would be really great. Let's see. Do we have any? Okay, any other questions that I have missed? Yeah, and so regarding carnivorous plants and orchids, those are 2 classes that I hope to have for the future, two topics I would like to address. So I'll be able to go into those in more detail in the future. And then let's see. Yeah, I think we have some new messages here. Let me scroll down and see. Okay, the coffee pot, yes, 3 dots. Okay. All right, so do we have any more questions before we close it out? It's about 12:40, and I told you this one would not go the full hour because we're leaving time at the end for the people in class to make their own terrariums. So do we have anything else before we conclude the online portion? Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you all joining in, and please stay posted in the future for more classes that we put out. I've added all of you to the Houseplant Academy group for sending out emails. Oh, and how do you know when terrarium needs to be vented? Okay, so if you're getting a lot of water condensation buildup on the sides, that means it's getting too wet and it needs some ventilation. So just kind of push the lid to the side, make it ajar, and let that dissipate, and then you can close it back again. So hopefully that helps. Because you do want a humid environment, but you don't want it so humid that that water is just pouring down the sides of the inside, and you're going to get mold and fungus and root rot perchance. So, okay, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it, and see you next time. And yes, Renita, happy birthday, by the way. I think Renita Santos, you told me today's your birthday, right? So happy birthday. And we will send pictures of what everybody makes. Okay, so we are going to. Where's
I
my?
want to see pictures.
In slideshow. Why is it not ending the meeting though?